people in the black community, myself, often worry that we might be a victim of police brutality. So, as a public service, the Chris Rock Show proudly presents this educational video. Have you ever been face to face with a police officer and wondered, is he about to kick my ass? Well, wonder no more. If you follow these easy tips, you'll be fine. First, obey the law. Laws were made for a reason. Think of them as hints. You've heard people say, man, I wouldn't do that shit if I was you. Well, here's some of that shit. Carjacking, armed robbery, arson, selling drugs, buying drugs, stabbing, shooting. You know, you probably won't get your ass kicked if you just use common sense. If you jump a subway turnstile, you might just get off with a warning from the police. But if you jump a turnstile carrying a loaded gun and smoking a joint, then maybe you need your ass kicked. We all know what happened to Rodney King. But Rodney wouldn't have got his ass kicked if he had just followed this simple tip. When you see flashing police lights in your mirror, stop immediately. Everybody knows, if the police have to come and get you, they're bringing an ass kicking with them.
A little Green Day to get us rolling in for this very special Policing Black and White show. Green Day, a band named after marijuana or weed. I guess if believing that strongly in weed gets you filthy rich and a rock and roll star, then maybe it ain't, I don't know, maybe it ain't too bad. What do I know? Also, put little Chris Rock in there at the beginning, just because I think it's fitting for this time, but I think Chris Rock is one of the funniest and most intelligent comics of our time, for sure. He's so funny, but he can drive a point home at the same time, and I think that's pretty unique in a comic. Anyway, thanks for joining us once again on this Policing Black and White bonus show. We kind of felt the need to get another one in there right around New Year's because everything that's happening, threats towards police, and also we had such an overwhelming reaction and some positive influence behind our last show that the numbers were staggering. I mean, we reached, according to Facebook, we reached over 9,000 people, and that isn't even including our YouTube channel, and we even have an unofficial podcast through Apple now. Apple's reviewing it, but the feedback from Apple seems pretty good, and that should be up very quickly. Well, this show is not going to be me preaching the whole time like the last two. This bonus, I like to call it a bonus episode, whatever you want to call it, is going to be a couple phone calls. That is going to be probably one of the biggest portions of our show, and I wanted to get it out there very quickly now that all the technology is set up in our studio finally. And thank you for being patient. We appreciate it. Let's not delay any further. Let's go to our first phone call. Hey, Sarge, you there?
Yeah, I am.
Good deal, man. Well, thanks for being a part of the show. I know you got a busy schedule, but I thought this was you were the perfect person to get into what I want to focus on here, especially because you had, almost 30 years experience as a cop. Is that right?
Well, it's actually 26. About 4 years military, so I have 30 years in the system, but 26 years actually with law enforcement.
All right, and then you retired and you're living the good life, right?
Oh, yeah, no stress.
Well, yeah, it looks like I retired too, but guess what, 25 years earlier than you did. So, well, listen, man, I wanted to get into a couple things here, and again, thanks for being a part of the show. I wanted to talk to you about what's going on with Ferguson and Staten Island and all this stuff with the race relations and the racism being thrown around. I kind of just wanted to get your take on that, and especially because you work through like the Rodney King stuff. I mean, you work through a lot of this stuff. So what's your take on that?
Well, I think we first say race. I think really we should be also addressing its income too. Police officers do some of their most intense work in lower income areas, whether it be the trailer parks, which when I first came on, it still holds true today, are predominantly white, or in the projects where it's predominantly African American. So I think that's what we really need to establish. Yes, the race is what's being named, but it really breaks down to economics. You have black and white and upper income neighborhoods that don't deal with the police. They don't have that much interaction, if any, with law enforcement. So they're not the ones that experience the aid that officers bring, as well as sometimes the tragic outcome that unfortunately goes hand in hand with dealing with intense situations and big parts of the criminal element.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because in the last podcast, I touched on the difference between racially profiling and criminally profiling, and that's pretty much what you just said there, that, yeah, we know where some crime is, you know, say if it's Section 8 housing or government housing, it's not the color that we're going after, it's just crime that we're going after, because, you know, crime and poverty go hand in hand. Do you agree with that?
Definitely, and I challenge your listeners to this. Ride down the road at night, get behind the car, and see if you can truly tell the race of the occupants in that car, even when you're behind them at a stoplight. Most times you can.
You bring up an awesome point. I mean, right before I resigned, I pulled over someone going over, I don't know, I think it was over 70 miles an hour actually in the opposite direction. And when I pulled them over, they happened to be Asian, and they accused me of being prejudiced and racist. It's just an uphill battle. I mean, in your career, gosh, 24 years or 26 years, whatever you said, how many times did you get called a racist, or even worse, actually have to go into IA and defend yourself for being called a racist? I mean, did that happen all the time with you?
Actually, Tim, or TJ, sorry, it's funny. The only time I was ever called into IA for any type of complaint is when I told a younger white female, I told her, "You're a liar," because she lied to me about someone else looked for who's in the very house. That's the only time I was called in IA for any type of complaint by a citizen.
Wow.
To where it went to IA. Now, I did have a few complaints that were handled at the squad level. My sergeant did the investigation, either found there was wrongdoing on my part or no wrongdoing, whatever. But it was such a minor complaint, it didn't warrant going to IA. I didn't spend a whole lot of time in IA. The funny thing is, when I first got out of field training, you go through the academy and then you training coach, that's your field training period. I worked the projects of the city I worked in for 17 years, and I loved working there. One of the reasons is because I came up in low income in the same city I served in, and I understood what cops meant to me at the time. They were the ones that, you know, kept the, you know, or as it's referred to, they keep the wolf from the sheep. They're the sheepdog. And I understood that. That was my understanding of police officers. And it's so funny, even when, I'm not going to sit here and say I wasn't, if I had $1 for every time someone said, "You're stopping me because I'm black," or whatever, I'd be a very rich man.
You would have resigned earlier.
Yeah, damn right. But the thing is, even back in the latter 80s through the 90s, when I was, you know, working the projects into the early 2000s, or the aughts, if that's how we're supposed to refer to it, most of the time that was told to me, I could sit there a lot of the time and just look at them and smile like, "Are you serious?" And they'd let it go. Now, there were some that were, you know, headlong, you know, "No, that's why you're stopping me," but that's usually because they were dead to rights.
Do you think it's getting worse? I mean, through your career, were you called a racist more times over towards the end of your career, you think? Do you think it's getting worse? As far as, let me explain. Do you think accusations of being racist, people throwing that word out there, do you think that's happening more times now than back then?
I do in some regards, but here's the reason it might not happen as much, because I think officers are now in the foxhole mentality. You know, they hide their foxhole when they get a call for service, whatever that may be. They go out, deal with that situation, then go back to their foxhole and wait for another radio dispatch. It's the days when I first came on, we used to call it wolf packing. You know, you get some of your guys on your squad, and you just walk through the crime areas. Not only were you looking for violations, but it was to also build rapport, get contacts. You might need that later. But now I think racism is stronger than ever now, but I think actually being called a racist towards the cop probably happens with less frequency now because officers are not proactive like they used to be.
You brought up another point there. I think that the word racism has lost its punch because it's thrown around so much now. I mean, when I would arrest someone or a traffic stop, it was almost like the go-to word for some people. And I'm not just talking about blacks. Listen, I mean, I'm talking about the whole race spectrum here. But it was the go-to word, and for some reason, citizens thought that if they said that to a cop, we would back off. I mean, do you think that the word racism has kind of lost its punch?
No, I don't. The reason I don't agree with that is because officers have dash cams now. They have cameras on their glasses, headsets, lapels, whatever, and they're so conscious of the fact anything they say can be taken out of context. So I think the citizens know that too. They know that it's okay to sit there and say an officer is racist. It's okay to sit there and use a racial derogatory slur with profanity to that officer. God forbid the officer responds the same way. Now, I'm not saying he should be dropping the N-bomb. That's inappropriate completely. But sort of a parallel here maybe is when I first became a police officer, we were taught, sometimes you have to speak a certain language to relate to your audience. And if you when I came in law enforcement in the 80s, if you went down in these high crime areas, not just the projects, but the trailer parks and all that stuff, black and white alike, you got out and your first contact, you treated people with respect. As soon as they started puffing up to you, motherfuck you, and all this, you had to respond in a like manner to de-escalate the situation. In other words, you had to get a form of street cred with them. Now, officers don't respond that way, and I think a lot of times you have uses of force, taser, mace, batons, and maybe with a few choice, harsh profanity words of shut the fuck up or you're going to jail. I think when an officer can say that, I'm not saying it's the first words out of his mouth, but when an officer can say that to certain people, especially when they're drunk or high, sometimes it's going to get their attention. Okay, I'm going too far. This guy is getting tired of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And society, they don't understand. You and I, Sarge, I mean, I'm not saying this to be cocky, but we were cops. We understand that, hey, calling somebody, saying to, get the fuck on your knees or put your fucking hands behind your back now. Stuff like that avoids having to use your taser. That could even avoid a shooting, like you were saying. But that doesn't matter. Society hears those curse words, and all of a sudden we're in the wrong. But they have no idea what we just avoided. And that's what you're trying to say too, right?
Exactly. They want cops to be robots. Well, careful if you want a robot. Robots don't have feelings. Therefore, that robot would not have compassion and empathy either. And if that robot, hears profanity, he's immediately supposed to go to one of his tools on his belt. That's not the answer either. Again, I want to make it perfectly clear. You treat all citizens with the respect they deserve.
Right.
And until they start not only disrespecting you, I can handle that. But when they're starting to test you, and that's what a lot of these people in these high crime areas do, they want to see if they can basically punk your ass out. Can they get you quivering in your boots? And then they know they've got an upper hand.
Now, I know you've seen that firsthand. As much as you've arrested someone and seen some good cops, I know, even being with you sometimes, you saw an officer get punked. I mean, it's hard to watch, ain't it?
Yeah, and they go on to be, captains and assistant chiefs because they've got this spotless record, no complaints, very low uses of force because they weren't effective as a street cop to begin with. I'm not saying all that achieve high